Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Dogman Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and today we have returning guest, one of our favorites. We're talking about Franco. Franco is back, and he is working on a follow-up to his Flash Gordon book he did a few years ago. It sounds like a lot of fun. We talk all things Flash Gordon, plus a whole litany of other projects he's working on. He's a very busy man. So without further ado, here is Franco. All-around awesome guy. We're talking about Franco. Sir, good to see you again.
Good to see you. How you been?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. We got to bump into each other at Terrificon. We had a great time there, so that was awesome. And it
Yeah,
sounds like you've been a little bit busy.
a little bit.
A
Yeah,
little.
retired from teaching and just doing a whole bunch of other stuff.
Well, I know one of the things you're working on is a character that's near and dear to my heart as a Defenders of the Earth fan. I'm talking about Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Let's see how did that all come together?
It was actually it happened at Terrificon the first time with Flash Gordon Adventures Volume One, and we were approached by Adam Walenta, who's the editor on the project, and asked Art and I if we were interested. And I'm like, Flash Gordon, yeah, why wouldn't we? Besides, the '70s Flash Gordon with the flowing locks and everything, we always watched the Buster Crab serials and stuff like that when we were kids. So because we're past the '70s, before the '70s kids. So we would watch those serials as well. And when the opportunity came up, we're like, yeah, why wouldn't we? And we have volume two, so volume one came out in November. Volume two is an anthology with a whole bunch of other people doing stories as well, just because the way schedules seem to work out. But they were able to manage to corral a whole bunch of awesome cartoonists. I did a bunch of stories in the new one. I even drew one of the stories in the new one. So I'm excited about the second volume.
Flash Gordon is one of those sort of cornerstone characters of comics. Like he was an original. What did you want to bring to the character that, you may not have seen before or to pay homage to something that had come previously?
Yeah, well, our mandate with that was basically, make it accessible for kids, make it accessible for someone who's never seen it before. And we get a lot of first time readers when we're doing books of our own in the kids market stuff. So, for us, it's a balance of how do we get it to be enjoyable for you, but also for your kids, because if you're reading it, you're like, oh, I remember this, right? This is silly, and we bring kind of like a Calvin and Hobbes type of feel to the comic strips and to the punchlines and stuff like that. But also, the kids could see the adventure and the humor in it as well.
I say, how do you go about making it accessible to all ages? I mean, what is your thought process in putting in, like you said, the humor and as well as mixing the action so it doesn't go over everyone's head or under, adults reading?
I want to say that it's difficult, but I have such a little kid mentality that it's real easy for me to write that stuff. I'm someone who grew up on it. Even today, when people ask me who my favorite actor is, without a doubt and without hesitation, I would say, because Bugs Bunny was always my favorite. He was on a kid level. He was slapstick. He was funny. But on an adult level, you're like, did he just do what I thought he did? And smack this guy with a frying pan, basically, call him a maroon, instead of a moron. So I grew up with that kind of humor, and that's really kind of like the level that I bring to it. I'm like, if I can achieve that, if I can get that level, so it works on both for an adult and for a kid, I've done my job. Those things just kind of come naturally to Art and myself when we're doing stuff like this.
Flash is someone who doesn't really have superpowers, but he has lasted decades and decades and decades. What do you think is the staying power of this character?
Well, uh, all I have to really say about that is George Lucas, Star Wars is my favorite, and George Lucas, before he wanted to do Star Wars, or before he did Star Wars, he wanted to do Flash Gordon, and couldn't get the rights. So what does that tell you about the staying power of this stuff over the years and years and years? It's action, it's adventure, it's spacefaring monsters and all this other stuff. It's just like a whole bunch of cool stuff, and it still appeals to me today. I would I love writing Flash Gordon. I would love to write, an adult Flash Gordon series. I would love to write Star Wars. I like all that stuff.
Just based on what you just said, if you got the chance, okay, Franco, here's Flash Gordon. Where do you begin? Is it the original origin story, or are you going to put a new spin on how you see Flash Gordon?
I think today's audiences are pretty savvy that they know the origins, or it's easy to find out what the origins are. It's not like when we were reading comic books back in the 70s, 80s, and we didn't have the internet, at our fingertips where we can look this stuff up. You do it in such a way where you kind of, illustrate a little bit or do a little bit of the background of what they are, but you launch into a new adventure is the way I would approach it.
Okay. Would you have Ming as the protagonist?
Yeah. Who
Obviously.
wouldn't? Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
I mean, it has a special place because one of the first
Wouldn't
comics.
you?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
one of the first comics my dad got me was a reprint. I think a Whitman reprint of a Flash Gordon, and it was Flash about this big jumping at Ming's face, and Ming is just going like that, and that stuck with me for years. So he
Yeah.
Ming to me was always the ultimate baddie.
Yeah, I remember seeing. I believe it was. I could be mistaken, but it was the Frazetta. It was also the Frazetta John Carter stuff, like that really kind of like, whoa, this is cool, and so yeah, John Carter, Flash Gordon. I love that Disney movie of John Carter a few years ago. It was just so poorly marketed, but for my money, it was a pretty solid adventure, and I enjoyed it. So again, I'm one of those space losers, I guess.
Join the club, man. We're all there. So with this anthology, who are some of the other folks that are going to be taking part in it?
Yeah, so Art and I did like a bookend story for it, like an opener and a closer. And then there's a whole bunch of people in here. We got Adam Willenta and his son did a story. We have Chris Eliopoulos from Xavier Riddle and Everybody Wants to Change the World type stuff. My buddy Jason May, Chris Giarrusso, just like a bunch of really talented cartoonists that were just assembled just for this. John Patrick Green, who does the investigator book series and stuff like that. So it was just like the you called in the bench of the World Series of cartoonists basically for this thing.
When you have a project like that, because you mentioned you guys did the beginning and the end, how do you kind of keep the beat going throughout the book that it all sort of stays linear in some way?
Well, that was the fun thing about this. It didn't really need to do that because each story is kind of in and of itself. They see what the beginning and outro were, but in between you could just do whatever you want, and that's kind of the fun. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of the fun of what the book is. What we introduce in the beginning kind of sets up that they can do whatever they want, within the middle of the book, and we get some crazy stuff happening.
So, what are your thoughts on the Flash Gordon movie, the Sam Jones Queen music classic? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I was a kid, it was awesome. Hokey, silly, but kind of awesome. And I watched it in the movie theaters, hoping it would be something like Star Wars. It wasn't, but it was fun in and of itself, and I appreciate it a lot more as I'm older. But if you would have told 1970 whatever Franco that is watching this movie in a movie theater on the big screen that years later he'd be doing a signing with Sam Jones in San Diego, it kind of you know and he looks this a little bit older and shorter hair, but man, when you're standing next to him, you're like, oh my god, that's Flash Gordon. He's like all buff and muscular and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool.
Was he a nice dude?
He was an awesome dude. Yeah, he was just like so into it. I think he's really kind of embraced that. He's Flash Gordon for a bunch of a whole generation of people, and he's just embraced it and he goes with it, and he's just the nicest guy ever.
I also think an underrated part of that movie is Timothy Dalton, T. Dalt, one of my
Yeah,
favorite Bonds, uh, being in there, and he took it seriously. He was the height of his thespianism in that
yeah,
movie.
Well, Volstaff,
Yes.
the actor.
Mhm.
I mean, that guy was really into it too. I mean, he was that's just it. Like, you had Max von Sydow as well, and
Mhm.
Melanie Anderson, who's just adorable.
Mhm.
It was just a lot of the right elements. I mean, if you didn't have those people, if you had other people, it might not have done as it might not have lasted as long in people's memories. It's a hokey movie. It's silly in parts, but they played for what it is. They played for real, and the hokiness is there, but you can roll with it.
Now, does King still own the rights to Flash Gordon? 'Cause I know they have the Phantom and a few others.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, everything has to go rights to they have to approve all the scripts and everything. So
Mhm.
yeah. Mhm.
And how are they to work with? Because I've mentioned before with some other folks, King Comics, they're right up there with DC and Marvel. Like they were there at the beginning, putting these books out, and so they have a really important place in comic history.
Yeah, I don't work with. I've met a bunch of people from there, and they seem very nice. I chatted with them for about an hour one day, and I think it was New York Comic Con.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know they were there. They came to see one of the drawing things that we did for Flash Gordon, and afterwards they came up and talked to him for about a good 45 minutes to an hour, and they were nice. But I really don't have much interaction because I deal with Papercutz, and they deal with them. So the mandate will come down that oh, you have to change this or you have to do that, and it hasn't been real taxing. It's been a pretty smooth process.
That's awesome. Speaking of interactions with Svengoolie, you've had
Yeah.
interactions. If
Oh
your
yeah.
shirt right there, it sells like hotcakes. I mean, I have the print up on my wall over there. That was big news, and a lot of people were very excited about it. Were very happy for you. How has that been?
It's been cool. Svengoolie is, I know that but I don't know how many people out there know about Svengoolie. It's more than you think.
Mhm.
But I like to be home on a Saturday night, and watch these old horror movies, and the schlocky shticks that they do, and the background information. Um, I got kind of caught up. I met Svengoolie at New York Comic Con when I was doing a signing at DC Comics, and so was he because he had his DC comic book out then. So our signings happened to be at the same time. So I've known Svengoolie for years and years, and I finally got the opportunity to meet him. It was weird because it was in New York, so he didn't have that big of a line,
Right.
and I was able to get in and talk to him for a couple of minutes. Um, and then there was an opportunity. I think it was also at New York Comic Con where I was talking to the editor of the book when he did his Lost in Time book, or they were talking about the Lost in Time book, and they were going to do a panel, and they said, "Oh, come along to the panel. You could be involved." I'm like, "No, I don't really want to." Like he goes, "No, no, no." He goes, "I want you to be involved with the book and everything too." And I'm like, "Oh, cool." So it just kind of helped where I helped them script out the comic book because they're used to like TV scripts and stuff like that. So they gave me a bunch of stuff. They gave me the script and everything, and I kind of made it into a comic script for the comic artist. So that was cool to do. I was so happy that they didn't change any of my jokes, because I threw a few jokes in there, and I'm like, oh, these need to be like really, really, really bad dad jokes, horror dad jokes, and I'm like, they're gonna take all of them out and they're gonna rewrite it. To my surprise, they didn't. That and Rich Kaz, personally added to one of my jokes, and I'm like, I feel like I've made it at this point, because I put one of the jokes in there about something, and he goes, "Oh, what if you just add this line at the end?" I'm like, "Oh my god, that's awesome." So yeah, I thought that would be the extent of my involvement, and it was cool to work with them and see them, and we had him do an exclusive signing at our store in Chicago for the cover that we did, which was cool. And I'm like, cool, I made it to the mountaintop. That's about it. And then yeah, earlier this year, I get a call that said, "Hey, would you like to?" And I'm like, before you even finish the sentence, I'm like, "Yes, I would like to." I don't know what you're asking me to do, but the answer is yes. And the result was this T-shirt. I sent them the design, and I said, "This is what I was thinking," and they're like, "This is great. we're going to have it as the first one of the artist edition for the year. And, they plaster my face all over TV, and, they sent me a bunch of swag and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, cool. There's a higher level to the mountaintop I didn't even know about, you know?
I think it's so cool they're doing that because I think Christopher Jones, Terry Beatty, I mean, all three of you amazing artists, and to get that sort of bump, that nudge into the national spotlight, I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it's kind of mind blowing because I've had people come up to me at conventions and going, "Are you Franco, the Svengoolie Franco?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he doesn't own me, but yeah, I'm that guy." Yeah.
Well, speaking of cons, how did San Diego Comic-Con go for you?
Good. It's just a grueling 5 days. It's the only show that's really 5 days, and just when you think it's over, you got 2 more days to go.
Mhm.
Um, you know, it's just a monster convention, and there's just a lot happening every day. But yeah, it was good and rewarding, and you know what, Svengoolie was out there for the first time this year,
Right.
um, and he brought the whole squad with him. And at one point, I found out where they were signing, and I'm like, oh, I want to go say hi.
Mhm.
And they made me get online, and they knew who I was, which kind of, again, another level to the mountaintop. And then they wanted to take pictures with me and everything. So it was a cool experience.
That's very awesome.
Yeah.
It seems like, from talking to you and some other folks that cons, it's a great way to meet fans and all that, but it's also where business gets done, where ideas gets pitched. And, how important is it for creators like yourself to have these cons to meet other folks and maybe start some of these kind of projects?
They're a real pain to do
Right.
and to get to and to prepare for. Every year I say I'm not going to do as many, and every year I've learned that I lied to myself, uh, and I go to a whole bunch. But that's where I get a lot of my work. The whole Svengoolie thing happened at a convention. The beginning, the comic book, but it rolled into me getting a phone call a couple of years later. The Flash Gordon thing happened at a convention where we were talking about stuff, and you talk to a bunch of people, you talk to a bunch of artists, you talk to a bunch of editors, and you never really know what's going to come out of there. So San Diego is hard to do. It's a big convention, uh, and I spend money to go out there. I don't recoup all that money when I go, but it's I know it's a loss leader. I know that I'm gonna maybe not make that money back, but I will at some point in the future, depending on what kind of deal comes out of it. Years ago we did a bunch of cartoon shorts for Cartoon Network. Their cartoon network block on Saturday mornings a few years ago, and we did a series of 5 Super Pets shorts.
Mhm.
And that happened because I was coming out of San Diego Convention Hall, and I happened to bump into Mike Carlin, who's editor, longtime editor at DC, Death of Superman guy, amazing guy. Happened to bump into him. And he goes, "Hey, what are you doing for dinner?" And I'm like, "I don't have any plans." And he goes, "Come with us." And then at dinner, the conversation just turned to, "Hey, have you ever done animation?" I said, "I went to school for animation, but I never did any." And blah 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 blah. And the end result was that. So I think for an upcoming writer artist, it's real important to go and network and talk to people. Again, as a writer artist, I spend a lot of time here
Right.
alone, working on stuff in my own head. So when you go out and you meet and you talk, and you never know what comes out of stuff like that.
We spoke about Flash. Are there other projects that you're working on as well?
There are. I signed a new deal with Papercutz for a new a property that's pretty well known that I can't talk about right now. But I'm working on a couple of books of that. I'm working on a couple of my own books. So there's a bunch of stuff always in the hopper happening.
Any more Dead Man stuff coming,
Man,
possibly? Maybe.
man, I wish there was. I the Dead Man book was I'm proud of that book,
Mhm.
but it's not what I wanted or pitched, honestly. So the Dead Man book, I wanted to have all the stories involve superheroes, and that was what I pitched. That was what I wrote my outline on. The discussion was had, and they're like, "Oh, this looks great, but
Right.
you can't have superheroes in it." I'm like, hmm? They wanted it to be scary stories. They wanted everything to take place in the DC universe, but they didn't necessarily want um, superheroes in it. And I'm like,
Mm,
oh, that was kind of crushing blow. If you've read the book,
mhm.
one of the stories is a Man Bat story in there,
Right.
and that story was added after there was editorial changes, and I slipped that one in. So because I had 12 stories in the original pitch, and they're like, you're an idiot. Why don't you make it 13? Because you need 13 for Halloween. But that was after some editorial changes, and I'm like, oh, 13 is a good idea. But that was after some editorial changes, and I'm like, oh, let me see. Those other people said no superheroes, but let's see about this one, and I put that one in, and that one kind of slid through. And my sequel pitch is still, hey, I want to do another one, but this time I want superheroes, like what my original plan was. But you know, it's all those things are based on sales and this and that and the other thing, and out of my control.
When you're doing your creator-owned stuff, I mean, where do you begin? Is it do you begin with a character? Do you begin with an overlying story arc that you want to explore? How do you start your own projects?
It really varies. You know, uh, two projects to illustrate how it comes about is one project I did was Faye in the Moon, which came out a couple years ago, and that happened when I was driving in the car, and there was kind of like a full moon, and I was listening to this Cars song, and there's a lyric in there about I see you standing under the midnight, which I actually put in the book because that's what kind of sparked the whole idea.
Mhm.
And I'm driving; it was a long drive, and I'm thinking about the moon looks kind of cool, but what if it wasn't there? What would happen? Like what if someone took the moon out of the sky, and it just kind of rolled into this idea that I sent to my agent. We pitched it out. Little B loved the idea. They love the artwork with the Saturn sisters that I had involved, and that's just how that came about. I have another book that's coming out in November called Chase Speedington and the Last Dragon's Breath,
Mhm.
and that one, I was trolling online, and I saw this amazing artist. His name is Mike Hardigan.
Mhm.
He's in New Zealand, and I saw his artwork, and I'm like, why is this guy not working on anything? Because this thing, his artwork looks amazing. And it. I just reached out to him. He didn't believe it was me. So, and I'm like, yeah, okay. I don't have that level of fame, buddy. You can believe it's me. Um, I reached out to him. We talked about stuff. We originally had planned a different project. One of the first pieces I saw of him was his Chase Speedington drawings. But I had a different idea planned out, and I talked to him about it, and we started working on it, and it was optioned out from us. So I said, "Hey, you can't work on it anymore because this company optioned it." Nothing ever happened to it. I actually just got the rights back to it, so nothing came of that, which is typical and happens.
Right.
But when that was optioned out, I went back to him and I said, "Hey, you were willing to work on this idea that I had, this project that I had. What is it that you want to do? Let's work on something." Because I was really grateful for him to want to work on that. And he goes, "Well, I've always wanted to do Chase Speedington," and I'm like, "Great, let's develop it." So that came from that character. We developed a backstory, it developed the story, and that's how that came about.
I mean, I know you and Art have a wonderful working relationship. As far as artists go, what do you look for? Is it just whatever catches your eye, or is it a certain style that you think is going to go with the idea that you have?
Yeah, it's a certain style, like again with Faye and the Moon, I wrote that story a few years ago,
Mhm.
and I knew that I was not the artist for it. Because I want a specific look. I wanted it to look more cartoony. I wanted it to look more like animation. When I met the Saturn sisters, at a convention, because I had never met them, and I saw their artwork at a show, and I started talking to them, and I said, "Hey, I might have this project. Do you want to talk about it and stuff like that?" So that's how that comes about. Like, I had the story for a couple of years. I just knew I wasn't the artist for it. And then I met them and I'm like, hey, these guys are the artists for that. Let's see if they want to jump on, and then it wound up happening.
Is it tough to say I'm not the artist for this because you are such a good artist? How do you know in your heart I'm just not the right guy for this aspect of it?
It's, I'm such a fan of, like, I'm a movie fan, I'm an animation fan, I'm a comic book fan. And, the one thing that is constant with all of those things is that there are different styles in those things. Like, you look at a Pixar movie, Toy Story is much, much different than, you know, um, Zootopia, even though they're CGI or whatever, like, or Kubo and the Two Strings, which is an amazing movie. There's visually and stylistically very different. And sometimes when a story pops into my head, I know it's not me. I had this one story that I've had for about 15, almost 20 years now, and I know I'm not the artist for it. I knew it at the beginning,
Right.
but I haven't found the artist yet. When I do, that's when that project will be pitched out and stuff like that. And then there's other times where it's like, yeah, this is me. I'm the artist on here.
Right.
For the longest time, it wasn't me because I was teaching full time. So I was a high school art teacher. So my schedule didn't allow for, hey, let me drop everything and draw this graphic novel, that'll take 2-3 months of my life. I wound up doing that with Teen Titans Go to the Library for DC, because when I wrote it, I had these different art styles in mind, and I kept saying to my editor, like, I want this for Robin, I want this for Raven, I want this. And I would show her examples, of my sketches. I'm like, I want something kind of like this. And she's like, well, why don't you do it? And I'm like, well, school schedule.
Right.
And then COVID hit. And then I went back to the editor. I'm like, hey, I'm home a lot. I think I can do this if the schedule is right. If you allow me more time than you would a normal person to get this done, I think I can do it. And they were very, very gracious and let me have the time to do it. And with COVID, I was home and I was just able to do it.
You mentioned, you have the story for the past 15 years that hasn't come to fruition yet. Do you think when it happens, the idea you had 15 years ago and where you start today are going to be the exact same, or do you think it's going to change as it goes on?
It'll change because it'll change because of the artist as well. There's certain things that, like, a good example of that is a book that I did with Sarah Richard, and she was the interstitial artist on Dead Man.
Mhm.
I just absolutely adore her as a person and adore her artwork. I mean, she's just phenomenally talented. We did a book called The Ghost the Owl, and I had an idea about it. I talked to her about it, and I gave her a script, and she goes, "Oh, this is good, but this is what I'm thinking also." And then she would show me artwork, and I'm like, "Oh, this is the direction we should go in as well." So it does change depending on who you're talking to and what you have in front of you, and again, knowing that I wasn't the artist for that kind of frees you up to doing some of that stuff.
Makes sense. You mentioned movies. It's been a big summer for movies, too, especially. Have you seen Superman and Fantastic Four? And what are your thoughts?
I loved both of them. I had some nitpicky stuff because I'm me, and I do have nitpicky stuff with everything. But I loved Superman. I got so emotional before the movie even opened. Like, when the trailer first hit, I was sitting on the couch with my wife, and I'm like, oh my god, the new trailer for Superman is out. And she was, okay, calm down. And I'm like, no, 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 we got to watch it. And I watched it, and I teared up, when he's yelling at Lois, like, people were gonna die, and I'm like, like, that's Superman. Like, we haven't seen that Superman in a few years. And the Man of Steel, I love Henry Cavill, the look and everything,
Mhm.
but the tone of those films was really kind of dark. The Superman Batman was like, Martha, why'd you say that? Um, was yeah, it was totally so dark, but this was just like such a breath of fresh air. And it was the Superman. And when I saw the movie too, I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. And what made that really extra special for me is one of my former students scored the film.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so he was in my advertising class, way back when, and one of the things that we did was one of the projects we did was he had to make a movie trailer. He
mhm.
had to score it, write it, and film it, and they all had these parameters that they had to hit. And he had told me at one point, he goes, this was cool. So I like to think that that's kind of what pushed them in that direction. He takes all the credit because he did all the work and he got to where he is. But to see him doing that was just kind of like, and I didn't really know until like I saw it in the theater, and I saw his name and I'm like, what? Like, and I wrote to him and he goes, yeah, I was thinking of you while I worked on this. And I was like, oh, that just makes my heart sore. Yeah.
And
And
Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four, my biggest gripe with that movie is, Ben Grimm changes into this, rock creature. His vocal cords would change too. And when his voice stayed the same, that was like, that bothered me a little bit. But I loved the movie. I loved, the whole retro kind of futuristic look to it with the science and everything. And it made sense. Of course, Reed Richards wants to, teleport an entire planet,
Sure.
over to the other side of the galaxy. Yeah, it's just a good time at the movies for both of those things.
I like that Ben Grimm also wasn't a stick in the mud the whole time. It wasn't like, oh, for heaven's sakes, oh, always having a gripe about something. He was actually somewhat positive, and was sort of the team leader. Like, we can do this. It wasn't like, oh, come on, idiot, something like that.
Yeah, and Johnny was a lot smarter than he was in comics, even though
Yep.
he's a race car driver in the comics and was doing a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm like, this kid's pretty smart. He
Right.
picked up on this thread and they went with that. I just think, the portrayal of everybody. Pedro Pascal was like, a really soft spoken Reed Richards, but there's that line where he says, "I think of all the horrible things, so you don't have to," type thing, and I'm like, oh crap, that's heavy, and yeah, that's what Reed Richards would do.
hmm
Mhm.
Do you think positivity and not having such dark films is going to be the new trend for these comic films?
I don't know. I like dark films sometimes,
Right.
but you know, I think they got it wrong with some characters. I think Batman needs to be dark. He's a dark character. When you do Justice League, it's needs to be a blend of the different characters because Superman is so totally different than Batman.
Right.
I think tonally they got Superman right. I think tonally the Batman films with Robert Pattinson were tonally right.
Yeah.
I would love to see them in a movie together, but it needs to be done, tonally correct and thought through, not just slap them together just to have them in a movie together.
Right. No, I totally agree. So when can fans be on the lookout for Flash Gordon?
Flash Gordon comes out in November. You can pre-order it right now. It comes out, I want to say November 4th or 5th, somewhere around there. Chase Speedington and the Last Dragon's Breath also comes out on the same day.
Right.
In November. And then I have a new book that I'm doing with my buddy Scoot McMahon called Ninja Kaiju that comes out in February of next year.
It's just a little bit busy.
A little bit, yeah.
And we're back. I really enjoyed talking to Franco. I mean, we always have a good time with him. One of the nicest people. If you haven't been to the shop that he's part of, All Yeah Comics, there's one in Chicago. I believe, I'm sorry, in Illinois. There's one also in Harrison, New York. You should go there, check it out. It's a wonderful place. I know my buddies and I love going there to visit. And check out Franco's book when it comes out, Flash Gordon. It sounds like a lot of fun. And plus, all those other things he's working on, guys. I mean, this is someone who is prolific. He's always up to something, and we always love what he's part of. We can't wait to have him back to talk about more and more things he is doing. So we hope you're having a wonderful week. Remember to like, subscribe, let your friends know, write a review, all these things. Let's help this project grow and grow and grow. And we can't do it without you guys. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.